This is my show. I moved here in 2012 with my family. This is part of my family right behind you, Palchi, and my teenager who is 17 years old and going off to college next year, which I cannot believe. We moved from a farm in New Jersey, and I spent a decade at that farm. It was a place that was really significant in my life. I had my child there, and I also was a foster parent to my two younger siblings. So that was a pretty dark period for me. The time when you're a foster parent normally is not easy, but for me it was my parents' children. So I was kind of having an existential crisis. I was a new mom myself. I was a mom to my younger siblings, and I was a daughter to my mother. And I was also watching my two younger siblings who were kind of acting out similar things as I acted out as a child, because they were the same, had the same mother as me. So during that time, a friend of mine, Emily, gave me a book called Existentialism is a Humanism. And this book, at that time, was the kind of depth that I needed. Existentialism, at least as I understand it, and I'm not a philosopher, but at that time it was the act of making a moral choice through your actions, and that was the definition of who you were. So all of those societal, religious expectations that I had on me faded away, and I was able to make my own actions and therefore my own morality. So it really switched something for me in my mind, and it switched something for me, of course, in my art as well, because these things are always linked. So when the kids went back, I'm just going to pass this around. It's a 100-year-old text too, so it's not like I'm recommending existentialism as a humanism. It just, at that moment in time, was really important for me. When we moved here in 2012, I had the most amazing experience of being able to get my own studio, and that was such a luxury. I really delved into the art side of my life, and I ended up going back to graduate school in my 40s. So a decade later, I ended up going to graduate school. During that time, I was making a lot of found object art. I was really drawn to objects that had a deep history, possibly several lifetimes before they got to me. So going to Goodwill was my jam. And as I was making my thesis show, one of my professors handed me the work of Janie Bennett. And so she's part of a movement called Object-Oriented Ontology. And she works with the idea that objects are vital actors in and of themselves without humans participating. So it's kind of like the Force in Star Wars, George Lucas. Everything has its own vibe and all of that stuff with a little bit less spirituality. And so for that reason, obviously a lot of artists were drawn to that, especially assemblage artists. So this book was written in 2010. She also wrote a book in 2015, or an essay in 2015, about the idea of total loss. And total loss as defined by an insurance company, when something is no longer useful to a human, like your car is crashed, or in this case she was talking about artwork. That at the moment of total loss, an object can become its most interesting. It has the most possibilities before it of what it could be next. And so I resonated right away with that idea. I'm going to pass this around too. Here, give us that. And excuse all the marginalia. I've lent out these books like 150 times. So I'm like, you must read it. So I was thinking about all of these things during that period of grad school, and when it came time for my thesis show, another big life event for me was my grandmother passing away. And so in late 2019, she passed away, and over that Christmas break, I went and visited her home and my family and spent some time with them. And then with the permission of my many, many brothers and their help, they helped me load in all of the belongings of my grandmother into a moving truck. And I brought it into the University of Iowa, and that became my the basis materials of my thesis show. So I had in mind both of these things. So I had this moral choice is the making of choices in front of other people. The decision making is who you are as a moral person from existentialism, and then all of these object-oriented ontology thoughts. But of course, this was my grandmother's furniture, and so there was a huge emotional part of that. I almost felt guilty taking all of this time over Christmas break, having this like huge amount of space and really kind of making a memorial to her out of this stuff. So when I opened the doors, I wasn't sure what to expect. I wasn't sure if this was going to resonate with anyone, or if it was just like a giant memorial to my grandmother, Margaret Estelle Harris, by the way. I was surprised. People had really emotional reactions, really visceral reactions, and that is when I started thinking about pop culture. And I know that sounds very strange, but for me, pop culture has to do with the decisions that we make as a society in mass. So all of those things that you're doing individually for existentialism, if you apply that to many people at the same time, and they're all making the same decision about, say, a really bizarre choice of having Queen Anne or Victorian revival furniture as the thing that is in the 80s, well, has some sort of power to it. So all of these people were walking into the show and recognizing their own childhoods, their own grandmother's house. There's the scent of secondhand smoke, and the uselessness of this stuff, if I had not taken it and loaded it into a truck and brought it into a gallery, it probably would have gone to a landfill because she was a heavy smoker and these things smell like that. So no one wants them. But in this context, in this space, in the University of Iowa giant gallery space, when people walked in and they saw lighting from interior spaces and they smelled cigarette smoke, and you can't get away from her 1980s Bill Blass nude perfume that she bought in boxes this big, that's like in all of the fabric of the thing. People were able to connect through this pop culture decision that everyone made about these things being the ubiquitous furniture of that time. And so that third piece is what I'm dealing with here. That third piece is where and this is, I'm gonna pass around some of the pictures. Normally, if I was doing an artist talk with a PowerPoint, I would show you all of these things, and I can't, so this is me being like, I can't do a PowerPoint in a gallery full of my own stuff. But here are some of the pictures in the back, or here are some of the pictures of the thesis show, and I'll pass that around. So that brings us to this artist statement. I'll worship anything. Put anything in front of me and I'll worship it. Worship zooms me into a thing and zooms me out to the absence of myself. 1 part deep history, 1 part plexiglass from Home Depot. The collaboration of the old and the new, the history of myself and this space. The arrangement of objects in a particular room at a particular time. The care that goes into worshiping something is the kind of humanity that I wish for. Sometimes I go into a museum and everything is dead. It takes a significant amount of work as the person viewing the artwork to put myself inside it. When I make something, I feel the reverence of walking into that museum, taking art off the wall, adding to it, and hanging it back up. We can worship anything. When worshiping, we don't even need to know what it is we are worshiping. To enter into worship, we place ourselves in the spot of our psyches where we want to receive and give. By perpetually inventing ourselves, we are inventing the world. There is nothing more appealing than that. This is what freedom is. The existentialists say, you are free, in other words, invent. Moral choice is constructing a piece of art. Choosing ourselves in the presence of others is the opposite of superstition. Choice is the worship of everything. This can go in a bunch of different directions, and I'm happy to go back and forth with whatever. But I can talk about the pieces, I can talk about the process of how this work came into this gallery, I can answer questions. So I guess first of all, do you have any questions?
Okay, I would like to ask you about your process, like
Yes.
your day.
Yeah.
When you know, how often do you go into your studio? How do you prepare to go into your studio? What time of day do you go into your studio? I mean, do you have any kind of set schedule, or is it just, I feel like working today, or whatever?
I don't have a set schedule. I have cycles. And I think that actually kind of dovetails nicely with the process of making the show, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
So amongst all of the art, I think I make a lot of different kinds of art. I was a painter for a long time. When we first moved here, I was primarily painting. People may think that I'm a different artist if you have seen my painting back in the early 2010s. I went to graduate school for sculpture, having made only the amount of sculpture that I needed to make for that application because I wanted to learn all of those skills. So then I did sculpture, so these are, very independent things, you walk around. But for me, as like my own personality, the pinnacle of all of those things is installation, and above that is site-specific installation. And the process of site-specific installation is very different than, say, doing all of your work in the studio, bringing it into hanging it gallery standard, and your work is pretty much done before you deliver it to the gallery. Here, I was looking for the space where the gallery was closed, so I would have the most amount of time that I could in the space. So, sort of to answer your question, I spend a lot of time thinking about the space. There was like a running joke in grad school about how many times I would clean a space before I started installing, because, and the joke was 7 times mop it, 7 times and you know that I'm done. Anyway, but it wouldn't make any sense to everybody else in this room. But yeah, I do. I mop a ton, I sweep. I like to see the patterns that change on the floor, see all the memory of the space that is there before I start installing in it. I like to see doing it that many times, cleaning that many times, helps me to see the light and the way that the light changes over different points in the day. What kind of light is there in January, my favorite. It pairs so well with internal, interior lighting, that warm versus cold. The direction of the light, so, instead of getting a direct shadow or color shadow, I guess, of these pieces of plexi, I'm going to get a kind of a warm, sometimes I'll get it, but I'll get more of a warm feeling, and when I'm looking out in the daytime and looking in at nighttime. So for the process of this show, you all are seeing this at the beginning. It's kind of a vulnerable stage for me. This was all created. There are parts of this, like the bronze mirror, obviously that's like 100 million steps to completion. But most of the stuff was assembled in this space and is reactive to this space. So I have some idea of what I want the space to feel like. That's what leads me. I spend time like placing things and then moving it like 1 inch and then moving it towards the light and then putting a spotlight on it. I mean, lighting takes like 2 weeks. So I think even among artists, site-specific is a very different process. So I have some, like the sewn parts of this were made. I messed around with the motor in my studio because I'm always nervous about electronic stuff. 120 volts, I don't want to hurt anybody or myself, so I make sure that that's working properly before coming to the space. But I'll make all of these things, and it's interesting because I have to have the PR ready before the art is done. So I lead with the writing. So that's an aspiration of what I want it to be. And then I have to perform it. So I had the center of that piece, which is the Jesus with the face covered up. And I had the Last Supper with the neon dots. That's it. That was the only thing that was like able to be used for PR. And then the written statement. And then I came in, and poor Paul helped me bring in all of the super heavy stuff like that secretary. It was nuts. Bring in like double the stuff that's in here. Sit in here all day, every day. Clean, move things like slightly, and then when all of that is done and I feel satisfied, that is this I'll worship anything. Then, in order to process that through the website, eventually, like 3 to 6 months from now, I will actually title each individual thing. And so I will photograph that as its own piece. I will list all of the like materials and ingredients of the thing, because I think all of those things are interesting. And the title is The Cherry on Top, and then it's finally finished. So this is an in-between part. It is its whole thing. It's the complete vision, all of it's super intentional. But it's not quite finished until the title goes on it. So kind of a strange process. If even working as a painter, totally different process, totally different thing. So for studio stuff, I'll spend a lot of time in my studio, just so I spend a lot of time with the things. That's one of the strange things about me personally, not site specific. I like to use things that I have like a relationship with. So I'll spend a lot of time with objects. Some of these objects have come from my home. You know, if it's just the right object, I'm just like, okay, it's got to go in there somewhere, even if it's just for me. So, did that answer?
I have a lot of questions. So
Yeah.
if anybody has questions, raise your hand. But do you,
Christine had a
Christine,
question. Christine, okay.
when you're in your studio and you're thinking about making the individual pieces, and then you come here and you think about how is it going to work in this space, and the pieces are still changing. I guess my question is, when you're in your studio, you're thinking about the possibilities. Do you do sketches, or do you just take pieces and play with them?
Everything. I think probably the easiest way to describe how I feel about these objects is that I almost treat them like I'm in a relationship with them, like a human. So if I was to come into a conversation and I had all of my points planned out, boring, weird, like, so I respond. I respond to it, you know, if it breaks, I respond to it. If it changes texture, I respond to it. So the top part of that sewn piece, it was a Barco lounger that I stripped and flipped inside out, but I didn't want to leave the Barco. I love that chair. I didn't want it to be done yet. So I just changed it, you know, and now it's part of this other thing. So and not all of the pieces I have the luxury of doing that with. But that's my preferred relationship with objects, so I can really understand them, really understand the weight of them, really understand the material, the kind of paint that was used, and then I can respond with like respect for that thing.
Did somebody have a question over there?
So I understand the use of the warm tones, and I'm curious about specifically the neon colors, the yellow and
Yeah.
the pink. And if you have an additional intention with the neon, because neon sometimes means danger. That's one question. And then my second one is like the Jesus figure here in the
Yeah.
Last Supper. I don't know if that's supposed to like be like Mickey Mouse, and I want to find out the shape that you have on top of that, and then the coverage of the faces here.
Okay, lots of things.
Yeah.
So the neon is new for me. I forgot to bring, I was going to bring so much show and tell. So over the course of the pandemic, I started collecting and using neon just for fun. It started with getting these mood glasses. I don't know if anyone has ever seen these. They're kind of like pop psychology, like you can get like a set of 10 and they're all the different colors and you're supposed to pick the one that makes you feel the thing that you need to feel or whatever. But I was just like, oh my gosh, this is like drugs, but not drugs. Like you put on like the magenta and the sky turns like purple, like everywhere, you know? So I was obsessed with these things and trying to like push them on friends and family to try them. And I was like, okay, dial it down, Stacy, just put it in your studio. So I started lining my windows with that, and I have very different light in my studio. It's all south facing, so I just started loving, it was interacting with all of the artwork, you know? So I would get like this giant like hot pink square hitting like these vintage things, and I was just like, oh my gosh, this is great. But with all of the ideas of the three things that I talked about, it seemed to me like not only do I love it, like the incorporation of both like modern and me with these vintage things, but I also loved, I guess, just the idea of intention, of having those decisions be highlighted for everyone to see. I am making this moral choice, as I'm calling it, I'm making these choices in front of you, and I'm not hiding my process. There was, you know, I even left things like my screw, like the screws that I was using were too long. I left the tape on the mirror that I was like re-gluing to make sure that it didn't fall on anybody. And you know, in Victorian era, there was that painting of the fly. I forget the name of the process, what that was. But it used to be that people would paint these like really super realistic scenes of like fruit or something, and then they would paint a fly on the top of the painting like a fly had landed on top of it. And this is sort of my method of doing that. I wish I could remember that term. It's, yeah, this is my decision. This is not a mistake. It's not like I have this all figured out at all. This is me in the middle of my process, and I am expressing that vulnerability to you. The Jesuses. Okay, so I'm so surprised I haven't gotten any sacrilegious questions at all from anyone in the opening or anything. But these pictures these are from my grandmother's house. Some of the things are still from her house in this show. But these were in like prominent places in her house. They were like sort of sacred to her, or at least we weren't allowed to touch them, you know that. But they were in a lot of people's houses, and so I sort of consider them as like a more than religious, as sort of a pop culture thing for American white people, I guess, to have in their home for a long period of time. So this was sitting at the top of her stairs, and the light was on 24 hours a day. So like going up this like dark staircase is like the looming face of Jesus, absolutely terrifying. But you know, at the end of her life, no one wanted these. I mean, it's not like they were great art. These were like mass-produced prints that, like, you know, somebody gave her in a cheap-ass frame. So like, I was the recipient of all this religiosity, but to me, I experienced it as this. The sacredness was only imparted by my grandmother, and the other part of it was purely pop culture to me. So I'm sort of playing with like and this no pun intended here, but the Madonna, like, or like, you know, I don't know, like the pop stars of my grandma's life, you know. So Mickey Mouse, I don't know where the Mickey Mouse came from. Which one was Mickey Mouse?
Well, I kind of see like the ears, but maybe
Oh.
it could be a lot of different images.
The pink on top
Yeah,
of Jesus'
right,
face.
totally,
Okay.
yeah.
So that is Victorian hair art. So a class that I took over the pandemic through this very strange website called Morbid Anatomy. I don't know why I am who I am, but there was this practice during the Victorian era where people would clip pieces of hair of their family or important people in their life, and then they would make hair art out of it. So this is one method of that hair art, and that's my mother's hair. And there are a bunch of others. Some of them are really, really strange, and I've made some of them too. But you can make like whole like flower arrangements, and this was a common thing for like upper class housewives of that time to collect hair from living or dead relatives and make flower bouquets, and that was like the family tree that hung in the household. So I'm not Mickey Mouse, but not mad. I'm not mad. The blanked out faces, yeah. It's sort of the same thing. I would say everything has 5 layers for me, so I'm just gonna pick one. It has the same meaning to me as using the neon plexi. It's I don't want to see the faces. I just want the pop culture sort of. I erase the parts I dislike, I guess.
So you don't mean for it to be dehumanizing?
I
By
don't
taking
mean,
away the face of it? It's just like a side effect or a consequence?
I mean-
a consequence.
not dehumanizing in a negative way, I guess.
Okay.
But I did want to remove all, I wanted it to be really abstract. I wanted this to be kind of, I didn't want there to be a distraction of a face to react to, except for the Easter egg Mary in the window. No, I didn't mean for it to be dehumanizing in a negative way, but for it to be just experiencing all of the more subtle parts of being able to see through or see color or shape or the lack of something filling the space.
I'm real curious about each of these pieces as they stand by themselves.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, were you going to talk about each piece, or can I just ask you about a particular piece?
Ask me about it.
Okay, so
Yeah.
for instance, I guess the question I have is there some kind of thing you want us to get from, like, say, this piece? Is there a story to this piece?
There are. Yeah, come on in.
This is the artist, Stacy.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can.
There are a lot of stories. There's never a specific thing that I want
All right.
anyone to get from my work. I'm kind of against that idea. Like, I feel like if you have that in your mind, isn't that propaganda? I don't know. But I do have things that I want you to feel. So I would like you to feel the difference between the winter light and this firelight. I would like you to feel some kind of nostalgia, probably. anticipating any of those things, but hoping that there's some kind of like a little bit of spiritual feeling. It changes during the nighttime, so it feels a little bit more like that. But as far as a story, there are things that I'm highlighting that I would like you to see, for sure. So like, I would like for you to see that there are, if you're looking and you care, you know, not like you have to, but there are these two mirrors that are identical. One is the original and one is a cast. There is the repair of this broken display case. I would like you to see that. I would like you to see that red leading into all of the cracks. So I think the cracks are absolutely beautiful. I would like you to see and feel the light, the quality of the light, the movement. Sort of beauty for beauty's sake at one point too. So.
Do you have a relationship with all of the objects? You said like somebody's from your grandmother's house. Do you have a relationship, a personal relationship with all of the vintage pieces?
All of the vintage pieces, yes. Yeah. A lot of them are deceptively simple also. They are not. Especially the movement pieces take a lot of time to perfect how those things are going to move. A lot of things are taken apart. So this is probably 4 different things that I've taken apart and put together to fit exactly that way. You know, this piece is hand blown by me and was really difficult to do, you know. So there are those like craft, like difficult things for all the people who are like, where's the craft in this, you know? There is that portion of it, but all of the things have either a long-term relationship with me or an intimate relationship with me, except for the plexi, which I'm kind of just using as like a highlighter, you know?
So I loved when you were talking about what it is that you would like us to kind of see, whether it's the light or the cracks or the juxtaposition. Would it be possible to, for a few, I mean, for me, obviously, the large piece in the front, these pieces standing in the center, could you walk us through a little
Sure.
bit like that?
Sure. Okay, so the piece in the front is a sideways secretary desk, and I removed all of the drawers and all of the back of the secretary. I think that furniture is really interesting. It's, no matter how you slice it, it's so strange that we don't spend the time thinking about furniture. We spend so much time with the furniture. It is the entire like landscape of our life. So, you know, the bed that you sleep in for X number of years, the couch that you sit on, it affects who you are, it affects your mood, it probably affects your decisions. So furniture it means a lot to me, and the use of it is not a light thing for me, but I am always drawn to, this is not my grandmother's piece. This is something that someone was getting rid of, and I just was like, those feet are ridiculous, ridiculous. I don't understand that pop culture move of having like animal feet as the feet for your furniture. And I would love to hear the origin story of that, but I fully embrace it. So I wanted something where the feet were kind of like highlighted instead of all the way at the bottom. And it just looks like sculpture to me. So the idea of it laying on its side, and so I kind of daydream. So that's part of the studio process is, oh my gosh, what would it look like? And it's like falling in love in a way. What would that look like in the window? Being able to see through this sculpture. It's a huge sculpture, you know, it's like a big guy sculpture, you know, and it's so heavy, but like most of it's nothing. So I thought that would be great. And then I was just thinking about that big empty space, and I was like, wouldn't it be funny to make an art version of those fireplaces? And so then I made like an art version of the fireplace, like the back of the fireplace is tinsel, which I also think is really funny and great and sweet, you know. So it's comforting to look at something that's moving slowly like that. So portion of this piece made as a failed grad school thing that I was doing. It did not work at all, but I loved the feeling of this. This is, you know, it's like stuff is like a giant like teddy bear. So I thought, wouldn't it be great to have like this like super hard, super rigid lines like being paired with this soft like weird looking like undular organic shape that just so happens to have these lines mimicking the straight lines that I'm trying to highlight. So I put those two things together, and put some more weird feet on the other end too. So what was the other piece?
Well, for me, this centerpiece with the, you know, all the kind of spice jars.
Yeah, so these are all, okay, so the pomander I use a lot in artwork. That's part of my own like mythology. I think it's really
What did you
interesting.
call it?
So this thing in the center is a pomander. And a pomander is, you probably know it if you've seen it. It's that thing also from the Victorian era, pop culture like gold. It's, you take an orange or an apple and you stick cloves in it. And at the time when it was made, it was during like a lot of illness. And so it was something that they thought would protect them from illness. And then as Victorian pop culture goes, it just spun out to like a million different meanings. So not only did it protect you from illness, but also from like the devil, and also from like evil, and also from like bad crops and whatever. So so it's not just oranges, but that's the most popular one. So this pomander is probably, I don't know, like 10 years old or so. So you can, if you dry them correctly, they smell amazing too. I almost covered all the vents with pomanders, but I just didn't have enough time to stick like 100 cloves in each orange. So, but to me, it represents the passage of time because it takes so long to make one of those. And then this weird like skeleton is left over of it, like long past when it is, when it's done smelling like anything. So all of the bottles are this like turmeric drink that I drink because I'm a little obsessive. So I was just like, you know what, I'm just gonna take a couple, like this is like a month's worth. I'm just gonna take a couple of these, but these have touched my lips. These are part of my body. The thing that I drank was part of my body, and I'm gonna show the evidence of that. So, and I also just love that you could look through most of the sculpture, but that it was obscured. So,
I thought that looked like, have you seen pictures of COVID?
yeah, it does.
It looks like
It
a
does.
COVID ball.
I know.
I thought it was a COVID ball.
Isn't it strange that that
Yes.
was the thing that people were using to
I
ward
think
off
that's
disease?
brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah. Too funny. Yeah, that probably would have freaked people out if they were just like little kids like that.
Well, I mean, we only saw that, you know, a few years ago when COVID was all over the place. And this is what it looks like. And I was like, oh wow.
Oh shoot.
She's captured COVID.
She can't make up shit.
This was the OG COVID.
I know. It's amazing.
Alright. Anything else?
The bronze mirror
Yeah.
that you replicated, you
Yes.
did that in your studio?
I did that at the University of Iowa where there is a foundry and
Oh,
so
wow.
many resources and I don't have to pay for anything.
Great. That's
What?
incredible, because I know that's like a 4-step process.
Oh my god, that if you're lucky.
Okay,
Yeah, no, it's like probably like 17 or so.
wow.
steps. I have a PowerPoint on it if you ever want to see bronze casting PowerPoint. Yes,
I've
darling.
never asked you this question. So
Okay.
you have all these portals that you've been building this year. Like, what are they to?
So all the reflections. The reason why I cast the bronze mirror is because I took an art history class and learned about bronze mirrors and their like ubiquitous nature in all of the Iron Ages of the world. And they were used as spiritual objects when they were cast back in the Iron Age. So people would use the mirror not to look at themselves, but to look behind them and to see another world. And so I loved that idea. And so I was thinking about, okay, if the mirror kind of is not that anymore for us, so what other ways can we do that? What other ways can we look into another world? And so the glasses were doing that for me. I felt like I was seeing the same world, and like with this other color, like transfixed on top of it, it was like what I imagined the original mirror being. And so I was calling it a portal, because of that. So looking through that thing, if it was, if it's plexi, if you're looking through plexi and you see the same thing that you would normally see with your human eyes, but in a different way, and it makes you pause and think. It's a sort of a spiritual practice, right? So
I'm curious about this little piece. Do you want to talk
Yeah.
about that little piece?
Okay. So the other show, so I made an entire other show that was supposed to be here. That's why there's a studio visit next week. When I agreed to the January show, I was like, no problem, because I have a whole show about 1964 tin litho dollhouses ready to go. But I didn't use that because I was like, how often am I going to get to do whatever I want in the space? I'm going to use that for that. So, but with the tin litho dollhouses, it was all miniature stuff, miniature painting. I would take apart these dollhouses and transfix them onto a canvas and then paint into the canvas, like sort of continuance of the story of the dollhouse. I did a lot of miniature painting with Danny, my kid, over the pandemic, and I just started seeing things like really, really small. How interesting is that to have tiny furniture? Like you can see it like you would see it in a photograph. And so I love the super cheesy light. I love the super cheesy spinning, and I couldn't believe the mirror. Did you see the writing in there? So it says, "I hope so."
What does it say?
I hope so. I like the idea of changing scale, just one change of scale within all of this big stuff, all of this furniture that's human sized, just to change perspective again, to kind of mix it up, and then to take advantage of all of the things like the mirror and the lights, and sort of zooming out of seeing something like that in human size, seeing it in doll size instead. And there's another little tiny piece.
Oh my God, I saw that.
And inside this is, I do it for myself, I swear to God. Inside is all the teeny tiny silverware. Don't you love it? Yeah. Thank you, hi Derek. Baby.
Awesome.
I noticed
I
the
actually-
hammer. You have a hammer at the sign-in. That's cute, little teeny hammer.
Are you still working on installing this piece? So you lifted off the motion detector, right? Is that the intention, or are you still working on that?
The motion detector does not work, so it's not sensing. Not sensing that, but I don't know. I think even if people don't see everything that's in the show, it doesn't matter. I want it to be complete in my mind, and if somebody is that curious, I want there to be a reward for that. So
Would you expect someone to touch it, or not?
I'm not against it.
For
Not
all of
against
your-
it. I figured if I wrote an artist statement that said, take something off a museum wall, edit it, and put it back, I was like, there might be an art person out there that's doing it, so I have to be okay with that.
Don't touch the glass case.
Well, you can on the 26th when the show comes.
You have to sign a waiver first.
Yeah, accept all responsibility for injury. Any other? Hi, Derek.
Hi, I have a question.
Sure.
In regards to this piece here, the painting that, this piece, the Last Supper, I realized it had like the disciples there and they had it, and then there's some the painting behind the faces there. What? Can you tell us a little bit about the painting that this piece and also could you elaborate the other piece there then on that same line, same
Yeah.
level that you put?
Yeah, so that piece, it's actually a print, like a cheap paper print of the Last Supper. And then I etched into the glass the fingertips. I thought the direction of all of the fingertips of all the people sitting at the Last Supper was super interesting. So I etched into the glass with the glass cutter to extend the fingertips of all of the people sitting at the table. And then of course it broke, which happened to so many things here. And then I was like, it's kind of okay because the break was really interesting. And I can't change the glass because I had already etched onto the glass and I had already put my fingerprint over top of all the faces. So most of the work of the artwork was on the glass itself. And so instead of hiding the break, I decided to frame it with neon. And that piece, I put a piece of Victorian hair art on top of Jesus's face there. And not in a disrespectful way, but in a way that I wanted to be able to keep that object, even though I'm not religious anymore. So I wanted to have the same love for it. So I made it into something that I could love and keep and worship.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tara. It's good to see you.
Hi, any other questions?
Comment maybe.
Yes.
So in response to Diane's question about, how are we to appreciate it, and
Yeah.
you were saying that I just want you to feel what you feel.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that sometimes you with these little arms back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I found entirely.
Disturbing?
No.
Oh, okay.
Not disturbing.
Okay.
But having said that, it reminds me of the analysts who sit there behind their patient as a completely blank slate, and the patient, the person, then tries to understand what they're feeling, which has always disturbed me. I want to know that person, the analyst who's talking.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about your work, I feel like that satisfies that urge to know what you're feeling in terms of these pieces.
Yeah.
That's a really perspective that I find essential. And
I agree with you.
so I am really happy that we could do this together.
Yeah, me too. I think it takes a lot. I think different people have different experiences with artwork, and I personally love to hear everything, so I can know the context. I like to know. I used to avoid older art because it was too overwhelming to think about understanding the entire context of that stuff. So I'd only look at super contemporary stuff because I'm I live in the world, so I know that world. But I agree. I think it's really important to talk about and to think about together all of that goes into each piece, because you can't know what's in another person's mind. So yeah, no problem doing that.
So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
thanks, guys.